back by popular demand, the reason we put this webinar together. We were going to do a intercropping for the grain farm, but we've had just a ton of interest and questions coming in for the last two webinars that we were talking about this topic. So fortunately, where we're at with Covers & Co., we are just blessed to have the most incredible farmers within our network that are willing to do panels like this. So tonight, much the same, three producers, very unique context and geography and different stages of their farming career. So really looking forward to the conversation tonight. So as per usual, questions go in the Q&A and not the chat. Once again, we'll be giving away a jacket for the best question, hat for the second best question. The judges will be yours truly. Rusty's asleep on the couch down behind the computer screen, so he might get a vote on this too. We'll see. So as I was saying, we've got three awesome panelists for tonight, each with unique context, and that's what we were kind of shooting for here. Also very unique geographies. So Shawn Catherwood, he's from Ceylon, Saskatchewan, so south of Regina, kind of dry land, Saskatchewan. So Shawn, it was his first year growing a cover crop this past year. It was a full season cover crop. And Shawn did some interesting research with our Saskatchewan territory manager, Dakota Odgers, sorry. And Shawn's also actively partnering with a cattle farm as he doesn't have any livestock himself. So Shawn's just a really well thought out guy. Got a really sharp pencil. I've enjoyed getting to know him over the past few years. Darwin Gork, a good friend of mine / mentor. I generally don't make a decision on our farm without at least talking it over with Darwin. And Darwin wanted the opportunity to talk about kind of a full systems approach, of which, of course, I very much encourage. So looking forward to the conversation with Darwin. And then from Teepee Creek up in the Peace, we've got Mack Erno. Sorry if I butchered that, Mack, but I'll get it straight when we introduce you. So Mack has been doing some different things up in the Peace Country. He's been doing corn grazing, grazing cover crops. Also just a really interesting, well thought out guy. So looking forward to the conversation tonight. But as per usual, I'm going to have to kick this one off. So I got home from Saskatchewan this afternoon, had to deal with some frozen water issues, and was planning on just kind of taking it easy. But I got some inspiration and thought there might be some interesting context I wanted to bring to the webinar tonight. So start this off the same way we did the previous webinar for those of you that weren't on. Or for those of you that were on or weren't on, this is kind of the guideline that I was working off of, which is this is the Manitoba Agriculture Cost of Production Budget for 2025. So $4.37, as you can see there in the bottom, that is cost per winter feed per cow per day. Of course, different systems will have different costs, but I think these are as fair and relevant costs as you're going to find. Highly recommend to all producers. Anywhere I go, it's like, check out these numbers, fill it out yourself. Knowing your actual cost of production, it's just, it makes some of these systems and some of these practices that we're going to talk about tonight just a lot more interesting and obvious from a cost saving standpoint. So I thought, because there's so much interest, actually there was a bred cow sale in Whitewood. I was again out in Saskatchewan, out in that territory, and hearing bred cows selling for north of this number and heifers selling well north of this number. But I thought it would just be interesting to show our numbers, because I do utilize the Manitoba Agriculture Cost of Production. We have our own numbers in there, and the actual Manitoba Cost of Production. So our ranch is Riot Ranch. This is on a $4,500 cow at 6.5% interest. An annual payment on that cow is about $1,100. Our operation cost, so that is to operationally keep a cow alive and productive for the entire year, is about $1,000. So we don't drive new equipment. Our feed cost is generally pretty low. We keep the animals on the land. Now we don't wean 800-pound calves, maybe half that actually. So we're a pretty low cost of production operation, at least I would like to think so. Our break-even cost, that's paying ourselves zero, is $2,100 per calf. So you flip over to the Manitoba agriculture numbers, of course, $4,500 cow is a $4,500 cow. That's what the payments are at, and the operations cost of $1,427. So for a break-even cost per calf of $2,527. So you can see, even with increased calf prices, and of course this is a good time to be in the cattle industry, there's still a lot of risk involved with this proposition. So reduce your biggest line item on your cost of production budget is winter feed cost, and that's something that we're touching on obviously tonight. But you can see the difference in cost in those two systems from a risk standpoint. Of course, we're not raising 700-pound calves, but we're doing it at minimal risk and trying to keep our costs low, and obviously try and get over that $2,100 break-even mark. But I always tell people, especially young people, when I'm touring or when I'm chatting with them, I mean, starting small when we're talking from a winter feeds standpoint, starting small actually can mean reasonably large savings and expenses. So I always say, I'm like, aim for increased or reducing your winter feed 30 days in the fall and 30 days in the spring. So on a cow herd of 200 cows, based on that cost per day from Manitoba Agriculture, it's a over $50,000 cost savings, like $260 per cow, if we can just keep the silage pile closed or their head out of a bale feeder for 30 days in the fall and 30 days in the spring. So some of the things we do on our farm we've been doing this a long time, and our goal is obviously more than 30 days. If we can bale graze cows for 150 days, that's our goal. Some years it's less, lots of years it's more. This year it will definitely be more, just dealing with the amount of snow that we've had this year. But these are some of the practices that we've utilized and will keep utilizing, that's worked well for our operation. So on the left side, we utilize summer seeded fall grazing warm season cover crops. So we either seed these when we're taking out a hay field or after a fall rye graze, silage, or harvest, or just wet areas. And basically, if we're seeding in June, that's what we're seeding, and that's what we're trying to do with it, is have the cows graze it. On the right side, that's regrowth from our cover crop dry hay. From this year, we had a really good year in southern Manitoba this year, and we're fortunate to have regrowth that looked like that. And on the left, this is a practice that we haven't tried yet, but I am super stoked to try in the 2025 year. This is actually from a presentation from Bart Lardner. He was at the Western Canadian Soil Health Conference that was in Edmonton this year, talking about straw bunching and some of the research data that they had. Pretty exciting for a guy like me that has access to grain land, has access to a conventional combine, and of course has the livestock to be able to utilize that residue. So grazing 144 cows per day, per acre per day on residue that would straw residue and chaff that would otherwise be wasted, supplemented with some grain. It's just like an incredibly reasonable way, in my opinion. We'll see how it works to feed a cow for the winter. Swath grazing, again, with this webinar, we've had a ton of swath grazing questions. Not sure how much experience the panelists have on it. I do have a bit, but it's something that we can definitely cover tonight. And I know if you've listened to this webinar before or heard me speak before, I talk about this is an intercrop that we really like on our mixed grain and cattle operation, which is corn that we take wet and sell to a feedlot. Intercropped with beans, so the cows have a high protein source to balance with the high energy of the corn residue. And we, on years where we don't get large amounts of snowfall in the fall, we utilize just a ton of grazing days off that corn and bean residue. And the last thing, just want to touch on, I posted this slide for our last webinar, but we got lots of new people on again tonight. This is, in my opinion, the most cost-efficient way to feed cows for the wintertime. My neighbors drive by and call that bale wasting, but that is, of course, our bale grazing system. We have access, we're just very fortunate in our area to have access to a good supply of either grass or slew hay. So what you're looking at there is a herd of 200 cows that are calving mid-May, grazing slew hay. And on the left, that's the most used vehicle on our farm. I don't know what year. My dad's 1993 Ford F-150 with the hopper in the back. We've utilized quite a bit this year, but with cost of commodities and the reasonable price that we're paying for hay, we're wintering cows for $2.30 all in cost. No tractor starting in the wintertime, no manure clean out, and all those valuable nutrients are being cycled on our land. Yeah, it's a bugger to cut that hay check for sure. But I would stress, doing budgets, understanding your cost of production, the price of land, of course, these days has a lot to do with it, especially in our area where it's gone batshit crazy, to put it lightly, I would say. It's something that in a year like this year, when in a lot of places hay is pretty reasonably priced, and the price of livestock, I think locking in your cost for 2025, I think that's just a good business practice. So Mack, if you want to unmute yourself, turn your video on. So Mack Erno, am I saying that right? Erno?
Erno, yeah, you got her. You bet.
So Mack, introduce yourself. I guess probably most important for the people that are watching is where you're sitting tonight, kind of what your growing conditions are like up there in the piece, and who you're farming with, what your operation's like.
Sure. Sounds good. Okay. Well, good evening, everybody. Yeah, my name is Mack Erno. We are based near Teepee Creek. So and I have my right-hand cow boss here tonight. This is Emma, our oldest daughter. She's home for reading week from college. She's currently in an agricultural program in Vermilion at Lakeland College. And so she's just home right now. We haven't seen her much this year, which has been a challenge, but she's here right now. So she's going to poke me in the side if I forget or am talking about something that's wrong, because she knows better.
Well, welcome to the webinar. It's an honor.
So yeah, we're Teepee Creek is home. That's northeast of Grand Prairie in the Peace Country. We're probably about the 55th latitude, so pretty far north, probably relative to lots of you folks on the call. We're definitely known for our long days in the summer and our short days in the winter. So we have some pretty extreme conditions. We have a very short growing season, and it seems to get shorter. We grow pretty prolifically late May, June into July, and by about August 1st, you can see a difference. When we're grazing, we really try hard to keep that plant as vegetative as long as possible, because it stops growing. It matures in July, and by August 1st, we don't see much growth anymore if we haven't grazed it. So it's a part of the reality of where we're at. We've been calving about 120 cows where we're at, generally May, June calving, and we run between 300 and 500 yearlings every year, generally just in the growing season. For the grazing season, which we try to stretch for as long as we can. A combination of owned and custom grazing, generally, we've done both. And yeah, when I was asked to be part of this, I said, geez, I don't know if I have anything to offer, but we very much feel we are students continually and always learning and listening, and we're relatively new. We're probably 10 years with running cattle on our own operation. Took holistic management in 2015, ranching for profit in 2018, to give you a rough idea. Continually trying to figure out how to make it all work. So, and actually pondering going back to take ranching for profit again. It was very worthwhile. If anybody has ever considered, I would really encourage you to think about it. It's a pretty cool course and really makes you think. But anyway,
considering myself,
Go ahead, Joe. Yeah.
I said I'm considering it myself, so maybe we can take it together.
Worthwhile. Absolutely happy to visit about it. It was a pretty cool experience. We went in Texas, so we made a trip out of it, and we went in Abilene, Texas, and took the course, and it was pretty neat. So.
Nice. Well, let's dive into kind of what you're growing, what your context is with this crop. What problems are you trying to solve?
For sure. So yeah, long winters and big feeding costs. in our part of the world. So we started dabbling in corn, I think 7 or 8 years ago was the first year. Had pretty overall, we're relatively happy with the success. Totally different than what, say, you would see, Joe, in southern Manitoba. We would never see grain corn come to maturity in our part of the world. The season just isn't long enough here for it. But when it comes to grazing corn, we've been relatively happy with the results, and we've had some mixed bag years for sure. But this gives you an idea. These pictures are probably in late July, early August, I would say, timing, to give you an idea. And we typically would see it get to maybe 6 to 7 feet. So we aren't in the country where you'll see 11, 12-foot corn. Doesn't exist here. We don't see gigantic cobs, but we have had cob development with some of the grazing varieties. We've grown a lot of pioneer corn here, a couple different varieties, and it gives you a bit of an idea. So, yeah, it gives you an idea. Those were a couple of our kids when they were younger, and the cobs, as you can see there, they're not crazy impressive, but we've had pretty good nutrition value from them, and they've worked well on the cows. Again, we calve May, June. So that's worked well because we graze early in the year and then as early as possible. So we generally start in November, early December, and then into, depending on which corn we have, kind of into January, February timing, something in that realm.
So Mac, when are you seeding that corn? And I guess when is that corn being terminated generally from a frost standpoint?
Yeah, for sure. And yeah, frost is generally what does get to us. We generally seed in the spring in May. Try to time it when the neighbors are seeding canola is ideal. Some years we've been later, for sure. And it is an advantage to get it in the ground as early as possible, for sure. And seed bed prep's really important with corn. We learned that. We cultivate ahead of time, and we grew a Roundup Ready variety and had really good luck with controlling weeds. And the first couple of years on the same field, we did 2 passes of glyphosate, and latter years, once we had weed pressure pretty knocked back, generally one was lots and was fine. So 1 pass. So yeah, that gives you a bit of an idea. Yeah. Yeah.
Sorry, I said let's talk about the winter time. I got some anyway, you fire away and I'll interrupt you when I feel necessary.
Yeah, by all means. So yeah, you can kind of get a bit of an idea. So typically we end up with that 6, 7-foot corn, and generally, and we get a lot of wind in the fall, so sometimes they break off and tip over, but it stands up really well. We can get a fair bit of snow in our part of the world. As you can see there, it drifts between the rows. It gets hard to get around. We generally either have to plow a trail or use a skidoo to get out there and put our fences up and make a plan. We try to move, when we're grazing corn, we try to move them every 3rd day. And the explanation for that has been, if people aren't familiar with corn, is on day 1, you hope to, and the cows will target the cobs on day 1. And we try to give them enough that the first day they pull cobs off the plant. The second day they pull the leaves and strip the stalk right down. And the 3rd day, you kind of force them to eat their broccoli, and they eat the stalks, and they generally chew that down to pretty close to ground level. It's surprising how well it cleans up. But you can see from the one picture there on the right, that's what we just grazed before, and we're moving on to the piece on the left. And
so, Mac, I'm wondering, have you ever toured like somebody from further south that more mature corn? Like I'm looking at that corn and that looks phenomenal from a cleanup standpoint. So do you think the actual immaturity that those plants
from
get
the cleanup, yeah,
yeah.
you know, that's a great question. I hadn't considered that, but you're right. The plants in the south. Yeah, great question. I want to be a fair argument to that. Yeah.
Sorry, it was a little choppy. I think we caught it all, Mac, but talk about what's going on here. Like, is this from a maturity standpoint, would this be something that you guys are seeing pretty regular, or would this be more on the immature side?
Well, this would be pretty typical to what we're grazing. So this would be fairly typical to what we would get to. So and a grain guy that would try to grow corn would be pretty unimpressed with what you see here. But for our cows, they love them and they go crazy for those cobs, and we've had pretty good luck with that level of maturity and the nutrition level too. It's gone pretty well. So
what are you seeing for grazing days on your corn, Mac? And do you have any idea as far as cost estimate on it?
yeah, you bet. So We found grazing days is a great question. It really depends on the crop year. We kind of have been anywhere from a low of 75 to a high of 160, 170 cow days an acre that we would hope to get out of the corn. And cost, it really does vary, but it really starts to make sense once you don't have to add fertilizer. And that was something that surprised us. Our goal was by having the cows on the land, having them graze and reincorporating that manure every spring when we worked before we seeded again on the same ground. We were surprised how quick, because we soil test every year, and we were surprised how quick we didn't have to add fertilizer. We thought it might take 7 or 8 years, and it took four going into year 5 before our soil test said you don't need to add fertilizer. And that was a big moment because I mean, everybody knows fertilizer is extremely expensive and is a huge factor. So yeah, we were able to get the costs down under $2 a day. We generally, and that's factoring in that we do try to factor a value of typical land rent for that land that we're using too, because I think it's important to allow for that too, because it's a real cost that we all face, and there's an opportunity cost to using it for that. So we typically try to factor in the land cost too. So that's an important piece around it. But yeah, we were able to get well under $2 a day. And the fertilizer piece was something that was really interesting to us. We kind of had a mentor that's actually further north than us that had grown corn for 25 years on his home piece, and he hadn't fertilized in over 20 years. And that was when we heard him say that, and he said, no, for real. Like, again, he grew pretty impressive corn crops and had wintered his cows on him, and had pretty good success.
So basically that, like the corn that you're producing, it's seed, chemical, as far as operational costs. Of course, you got the land insurance and depreciation, all that stuff, but uh are you sowing it at a higher plant population?
No, just normal. Normal recommendation for the corn. Nothing crazy. Yeah.
Yeah. Nice.
Yeah.
Well, let's talk about what you got going on here. It looks
Sure. Yeah,
gorgeous.
briefly on the corn before we go past, one of the things we are just going to mention was about electric fencing in the winter. We have,
Yes, you betcha. Good point.
yeah, and I will just talk briefly on it, that we have lots of neighbors that say, oh man, you guys have got it all figured out. You never start a tractor when you're on your corn. That must be amazing. And it is, but it's sometimes not for the faint of heart.
Yes.
We've learned the hard way sometimes around that, and have asked some people who have more experience about some of their experience for advice too, because electric fence works a lot different in the summer than it does in the winter. So it can have its challenges, definitely, and making sure that it works. And some good advice that was offered to us once was, if you figure out, because sometimes you just have cows that just seem to go through the wire no matter what. And we've actually experienced it and seen an old boss cow line up a weaker cow and push her through the fence so that they can cross behind her and get that wire caught up in the cord. And you go, man, that's smart. And they figure it out. And we've seen it happen to the point and talk to people about it. So how do you solve that? And lots of guys would say, the biggest thing you can do to help yourself, sort her off and keep her at the yard. Figure out who she is and solve the problem, and then the problem goes away. They were right. We've tried it, and that absolutely does solve a lot of the problem when you're fighting and pulling your hair out with winter electric fence. So I just wanted to mention the factors. So
maybe for the people that are on, I know Darwin does a bit of corn grazing as well, and he's gonna touch on it. But what are you guys doing for winter fencing? What have you seen the most success with?
So we've tried a bunch of different stuff. We've probably had the most success, I would say, with 2 wires. We put out two wires on reels that we would roll out on rebar posts with separate insulators, one hot and one grounded. And it seems like that's where we've had the most success, where they can get a shock by touching both wires at the same time, as opposed to hoping that they get enough contact through the ground with standing on a foot of snow, packed ice, and internet.
For sure. So can you see that?
Great.
Okay? Can you see that okay,
Yeah,
Max?
I can
Or
see
you
that.
just you cut out a bit there. I didn't mean to rush you.
Oh, perfect. That's great. Yeah, so we've ran yearlings. We've experimented with grazing. So we're actually really interested in Covers and Co. We're actually a new dealer. We have a feed business that we're working with and hoping to plant some this year, which will be our first time. So we're really experimenting. We have experimented with some cover type crop cocktail mixes in the past, largely with our own experimentation. I would definitely say with varying degrees of success. Sometimes it's been pretty good results, and sometimes nothing that we'd want to write home about or brag about for sure. So
That's how you learn though.
it is, yeah, the hard lessons, that's definitely how they come. So so yeah, when we graze yearlings, we generally try to move them once a day as a rule. Sometimes every 2 or 3 days, but as a rule, we try for once a day. So daily moves, and so we graze relatively intensely, kind of like you can see here, and then graze hard and move on, and have a long rest period. So that's always our goal. And this is, yeah, some cattle on our place, and then that was a cocktail mix that we grew one year.
So maybe it would be helpful for the people watching, Mac. What's your strategy when grazing annual cover crops? When are you deciding to hit them? How many animals you hitting them with? And of course, if you're aiming for a day, those paddock sizes are going to change throughout the year.
Yeah, definitely. And it changes on the results of the crop too, like how dense it is and what that looks like for sure too. So it depends on the time of year that we're grazing it. If we're trying for regrowth, we do graze it a little differently than if we're just cleaning up what's left, thinking about the next season and what that's going to look like. So it really depends how much we'll leave behind and how hard we'll try to graze it. A lot of our grazing is on annual mixes for sure too, and so we try to strategize that a little bit differently too, and depending on the time of year. Definitely in our peak growing season, we try to clip that plant, keep it vegetative, and move on as quickly as possible because we just can't cover enough ground because our season is so fast. So it's pretty hot and heavy and intense, and then we slow down when the growth slows down.
So I think you've got well, you've got some late fall grazing photos coming up at the end here, but what do you got, I guess, what do you got going on here? I want to talk a little bit at the end about kind of your later fall grazing strategies.
Yeah, you bet. So yeah, this was some cocktail mix that we put together ourselves and added some oats, and that's I believe it was a turnip there, or maybe a radish. I'm not even. You probably know better.
Looks like a turnip.
Looks like a turnip. Yeah, there you go. I mean, it's nothing. Again, it's nothing to write home about, but it was something new for us. We'd never grown or seen anything like that in our fields before, so it was kind of interesting. And at that stage. And yeah, in the middle picture, we're grazing some pasture land. Those are annuals. And then this would on the right would be a very typical with a fair bit of oats in it, which that's one of the things we run into is when we experiment and try to figure out the right rates. We definitely have found that certain crops will definitely overshadow other crops, and you get a whole bunch of something and not much of anything else. And that's a pretty common occurrence that we've experienced in our experimentation. So.
So what are you kind of expecting as far as weight gain on the calves throughout the summer?
Um, Expecting is a great question. We'd like to always see better gains, but we've found in our part of the world across the board, pretty typical on heifers. We graze a lot of heifers has been a pound and a half to 1.8 if things go really well. I mean, we'd like to be optimistic and say it's a lot higher, but that's been pretty real numbers that we've experienced and seen way in the cattle in and out.
So maybe talk a little bit about moving those animals. I guess how that operation has changed, I guess, from a management standpoint, kind of throughout the years. And I think I'm just gonna, yeah, next one we got looking later in the year. Just set up the next picture as well, Mac, as far as like uh, what you plan for regrowth, what you get for utilization, how many days you're grazing those animals for.
You bet. Yeah, we typically try to graze for as long as possible for like kind of in our part of the world, 100 when we're running yearlings, kind of in that 120. When we get over 120 days, we're pretty happy with the season. We try to stretch it for as long as we can, but 120 to 140 days would be kind of a goal. And yeah, it really depends how long we're going to. What our goals are and what time of year it is for sure. Like what intensity we would graze them at and what that would look like. So yeah, I don't know if I answered your question, Roger, but
You did. Well, let's talk about kind of the end of the grazing season. So like when you're generally pulling those animals off. And I guess maybe talk a little bit more, you touched on it, your strategy early in the year of buzzing them across. I know that's probably part of just the issue up there when you're getting so much sunlight, those plants are growing so rapidly. But I guess what that leaves you for
yes.
later in the fall as far as regrowth.
For sure, absolutely. So yeah, it oh, we talk about it as how important it is to clip because our growing season is so short and our days are so long. Like we do have such long days at our peak of the growing season, and it's really important to clip the top of that plant and keep it vegetative so that it doesn't mature. And that allows us to extend the grazing season. So actually, in this photo, you can see there's a highway between the lighter ground and the greener in the background. We graze both sides, and so we're grazing stuff that got pretty mature on us, and then we're going to go across the highway here and graze again on that greener stuff heading into fall. So I would venture to say this picture is probably in September in our part of the world, and we'd be going back to some pretty good green grazing because of when we timed our clip on it the last time around. So
So what day, like, I know, I'm sure your falls are the same as ours, where it's pretty random depending on the year, but when are you generally planning on pulling those animals off?
we generally shoot for early October if all goes well. Yeah, depending on timing and what we have for feed, late September, early October is when they generally get pulled. So
Cool. Well, I think that's yeah, that is all I got for you. Great job, Mac. Much appreciated. Stick around for question time.
sounds great. Thank you.
Thanks for being on. So Sean, if you want to turn your video on and your mic on. So Shawn Catherwood from Ceylon. We didn't get a chance to talk about it before, Sean, but tough playoff loss. That's too bad. Dakota was updating me on the Saskatchewan senior hockey, what was going on. It sounds like you guys had a great year. But chat a little bit about your operation, your business, who you're farming with, and we'll dive into kind of the experimentation and trialing you were doing this year.
Sounds good, Joe. And we're not done yet. We still have provincials to play, so still
Oh,
got some hockey
sweet.
left.
Nice.
Yeah, so Shawn Catherwood from Ceylon, Saskatchewan, which is 80 miles south of Regina. It's about 35, 40 miles north of the Montana border. And our area is typically pretty dry, so average rainfall, whatever you want to call average or normal, is 6 to 9 inches, I think, in season precipitation. We haven't seen anywhere near that for probably 5 years. Last couple years, it's been more like 3 inches per season. So it's been in this dry cycle for sure, and trying to play around with some of these soil health principles and integrating cover crops and whatnot has been a challenge because of the drought. But it's also been fun and learning a lot of great ways to do this. So when it does rain, I think we'll be kind of hitting the ground running kind of thing. So definitely lean into a bit of that tonight. I am also just a 1,500 acre grain farmer. I have no livestock, so it's a bit of a unique perspective on this webinar tonight. The only four-legged animals I have is two dogs and a cat. And I have yet to figure out how cover crops can reduce those feed costs, but I know Joe is peer pressuring me into Joe and many others into buying some cattle at some point, and I think I'm definitely building up to that, which we'll talk about through my slides of partnering with cattle producers to integrate the livestock on my land with the diversity from the cover crops. I'm definitely learning a lot, and I'm excited to eventually kind of get into that. Yeah, on our grain farm, we kind of really immersed in this regenerative ag movement, or whatever you want to call it. I know there's a great quote in the new product guide from Covers and Co. I can't exactly remember how it goes, but it doesn't really matter what you call it. At the end of the day, we're just trying to find a way to survive and be profitable. And that's why we do what we do. So we're a really highly diversified grain farm. We grow 8 cash crops for 2025 is the plan. Lots of that is intercropping together as well. Then we also grow a different variety of cover crop blends from Covers and Co. And now trying to integrate the livestock through partnerships with that as well.
So,
And
Sean, but just sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you, but I think some good context for part of the reason why I was excited to have your perspective coming on. I mean, we've got to know each other pretty good over the last few years, but maybe talk a little bit about the program you were involved with and with PepsiCo, and a little bit of your business, your on-farm business that you're kind of partnering with some producers as well from kind of a soil health agronomy side.
yeah, for sure. So I guess to back up a little bit too with that question, my background really is agronomy, so that's what I'm educated in. I kind of got brought up as a conventional agronomist, but always fighting that with my passion for soil health. So it's kind of been an interesting dynamic that way. And last year, or a couple years ago, I guess, I worked for PepsiCo and I was the Canada Regenerative Ag Engagement Lead. So what that really meant was I was in charge of kind of designing and executing on PepsiCo's Region Ag on-farm programs that they have in Western Canada, for crops like canola, oats, and potatoes, and just kind of trying to design what that looks like for the farmers. Gained a lot of really cool perspective of on-farm programming, the carbon program world, offsets, insets, and all that kind of stuff. So I took all that information and knowledge I learned from that job and started my own business, which is Spurline Crop Solutions. You can see there, and we do a lot of kind of on-farm program consulting for farmers, help them kind of figure out what does this all mean, help them navigate through these different programs. So I spent a lot of time on that, as well as the farm, of course. And also, obviously, it covers and co-dealer as well, which started doing that last year.
Cool. Well, and for the sake of time, maybe let's dive into it. So I think it's really cool. I know Dakota's on tonight, and really we're lucky to be able to partner with producers like you guys for doing trials like this. I mean, everywhere I go, I always say, I'm like, Mother Nature has been growing plants on planet Earth like this for 400 million years. The chances of her being wrong are slim to none. But it's really just understanding and educating ourselves and trialing this stuff to figure out solutions that work best for on farm and within that farm's context. So maybe just touch on a little bit about what you and Dakota did over the summer and kind of what you were seeing.
Yeah,
Don't
for sure.
don't
So,
give don't give too much away. We've got pictures coming. I want to walk you through
okay,
uh, your first full season.
sounds good. So yeah, I guess I've been playing around with cover crops for a couple years leading up to last year, but it was always in the shoulder season. So in the fall, after harvest, try and throw a few plants together like forage oats and forage peas, and just never really got anywhere because it's always so dry that time of year. So last year was the first year I decided to actually take a cash crop out of rotation, grow a full season cover. So we did that in a trial setting here with Dakota. We did the full season cover blend versus just barley monocrop. And the idea of this trial was to look at the profitability and the cost of production for me as a grain farmer, selling that as a green feed standing hay crop to my neighbor. And then we looked at the profitability of that cover crop versus the barley. And then, of course, later on in the season, looking at that regrowth potential of the cover crop so we could actually get some livestock on this land in the fall as well, in partnership with that same cattle producer that bought the hay. So it was a really cool way for my operation to get that diversity that we've been trying to get with cover crops, but also find a way to earn a revenue off that by selling it as hay. But then, of course, you're kind of exporting all that biomass, and that's not ideal when talking kind of soil health principles. So I was really excited to see what kind of regrowth we would get out of this, so we could get some cow-calf pairs grazing this in the fall, which then helps our cattle partners as well with their feed costs, and they don't have to start feeding their bales until whatever November or so. So that was kind of the premise of this trial. And then yeah, I won't give up too much. We can kind of walk through it in the
Well,
future
I
pictures here.
And I just want to touch on that point, Sean, where for people that have been on the webinar, people that have heard either me talk or our team within Covers and Co, it's like that's something that we just see as a necessity in the future. I don't know if the answer is or if it's realistic to think that, a 30,000 acre grain farm or even a 2,000 acre grain farm is going to rush out and buy a herd of cattle as much as I think it would be a good idea for you, Sean. Uh, but it's really about something like what Sean did this year, and it's part of the reason why I thought Sean would just be a great perspective on the webinar tonight. This is a partnership that work really, really well with for both sides. It's found
Mhm.
revenue for the grain farm, and for the livestock producer, it's a cheap feed source. And like I touched on at the start, it's days and biomass you can utilize to keep your cow's head out of a bale feeder or out of the silage pile. So yeah, just really cool. Obviously, Sean, you're an outside the box thinker, and I think it's trials like this and it's producers like yourself. Like these are the blueprints that we gotta lay out for the future because it's just a win-win. Well, it's a win-win-win for the grain farm, the cattle farm, and the soil as well, keeping something growing and getting the animals back on the land.
Yeah, exactly.
So I guess, Sean, I want to set this up because I have changed my presentation on the road this last little while, and it might be fun for you to do to kind of do something similar. I walk the people in the meetings kind of through my first full season, and based on like I came from the university system, like I was taught that uptake removal and soil tests and whatnot. So I think it's kind of cool to like walk through my first experience, and I was wondering if you'd do the same for me tonight. And so that kind of starts at seeding time, where it's like, what was your understanding basis? Obviously, you kind of had the partnership with the cattle producer lined up, but like, what was the expectation with this crop? And like, I guess, did it was it what you thought, or like what were the learning opportunities that happened?
Yeah, for sure. So, it's great lead up question. So the first picture just shows me seeding this into durum stubble. That really drives home the point of how on our operation we're trying to integrate these cover crops into our rotation and actually we all know cover crops are a great tool for soil health and all that, but how can I actually make a cover crop a cash crop? So that's my first attempt to try and figure that out, I guess, this past year. And that was my expectation going in was okay, we're not going to fertilize this cover crop. We want to see how it can drive its own fertility through nutrient cycling, etc., and compare that to the barley, which we did fertilize. And then now going forward as well, we have expectation that through soil testing we'll be able to see how our chemical analysis from these soil tests are coming back, and hopefully we can keep reducing that fertilizer as we go forward with these cover crops. So that was kind of my expectation was everything I look at is from the soil and the soil drives everything. So I wasn't necessarily thinking about the livestock integration. That was my primary goal, but that was definitely an added bonus at the end of the year. So that's kind of where I came from, just to kind of set it up. So yeah, kind of went with this plan of very low input cover crop versus kind of the status quo for the area, high input barley green feed crop. So we didn't give the cover crop any fertilizer, just the inoculant for the legumes. And then for the barley, we kind of threw, I think it was 200 pounds of fertilizer at it. And then we looked at the cost of production analysis of all of that. Um, and then I expected the barley to completely out yield the cover crop, but that is not what happened at all. They actually yielded very similarly. I think the barley only won by 300 pounds an acre of dry hay. And then when we actually applied the profit to it, the cover crop I think earned me something like $50 net revenue per acre. And then the barley was in the green side, it was like $3 an acre, but not very much. And I always like telling people this year, where it was really dry for us, of course. My cover crop was the most profitable crop on my farm last year because it was the only crop I didn't collect crop insurance. So that was kind of eye-opening and pretty cool. And now I'm excited to see what can we do when it actually rains, 6 to 8 inches like it should in our area.
So, well, one, Sean, I can tell you 21, 22, 23 around here weren't a ton of fun. I tell people, I'm like, you can put all the principles in place, and if it doesn't rain, it's just you feel like you're just not making the progress. But we were very fortunate to get rainfall this year, and damn, I'm telling you, does it feel good when it happens. So I'm keeping my fingers crossed for both of us this upcoming year.
Um, yeah, so this was us harvesting a trial. So it's about July 15th, middle of July. There were 70 days into the crop. And the only reason we kind of rushed out there to harvest was the barley, which you can see on the right, was really starting to turn. So we had to get there as soon as we could to make sure we got as much biomass as we could. But it was kind of cool to see the full season cover still had quite a bit of green material underneath. We probably could have waited a little bit longer to cut that one, but we wanted to do everything at the same time for the trial. And yielded about 2 bales an acre, both the barley and the cover crop, which again I was very surprised by. I know 2 bales an acre isn't crazy productive, but given the rainfall, I was actually quite pleased with it.
What the barley, I'm curious, Sean, what were the nitrates like with that type of fertilizer load?
Ooh, that's a good question. I can't remember off the top of my head, but they were, by the time we tested this, actually not as significant as we thought they would be. I can't remember the number off the top of my head, but it wasn't concerning.
So,
They did come
well,
back all right.
that's good. So I guess, sorry, I just was taking a sneak peek there. We didn't have we didn't, Dakota actually in his presentation, he's got a picture of what that the full season looked like in August, and then again when you guys actually did get some rainfall in September coming back. But maybe just touch on a little bit about what it looked like in fall when you kind of made that decision to get the livestock back on the land, and I guess just a ballpark of what you were seeing from like a grazing day standpoint and
Mhm.
utilization.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, so that's kind of the coolest part about this whole trial. I think Dakota named it on the website Back from the Dead. So we cut it on July 15th, and then we hadn't seen a drop of rain from June 28th till August 20th. So it was kind of 2 straight months. So we cut it, as you can see in the picture here, baled it, got the bales off, and we're hoping for any kind of regrowth. And it just didn't happen. It was everything looked dead by the kind of middle of August. I remember I texted Dakota a picture of me trying to put a shovel in my ground, and it was just rock hard. No green to be seen. I was like, I think this trial's done. We're not getting any regrowth, so we're not going to get any animals integrated here. The next thing you know, the skies opened up on August 20th. We got a couple inches of rain, and I was just amazed to see what came back on the cover crop side. It almost looked, not almost, it did look as productive as when we were watching it grow from seeding time in May and June. And then we kept getting more and more rains. We actually ended up getting 6 inches of rain from August 20th up till freeze up, which was awesome to see the kind of biomass that came back. And yeah, I don't think we did get any good pictures in the slide of that, unfortunately, but there was enough biomass there to graze 200 pair for 5 to 7 days it was. And I'll admit I did a horrible job planning the grazing part of this because again, I kind of gave up on this trial, to be honest with you. And then it started raining. I was like, oh man, I got to get kind of my ducks in a row here and figure out what we're going to do with my cattle producer partner. And so kind of last minute, we got together, we built some temporary fence. Their cows came home from pasture middle of October. We threw them out here, and this was only a 25-acre trial, so it's not a very big area. And the 200 pair were feeding for about 7 days. But to be honest, they could have fed for longer than that. We were just struggling with keeping them in the fence because, again, we didn't really have a good plan. But it was a really good learning experience for me to understand to actually do this properly. I need to have a better plan going into the year, which I do for next year. I'm actually working with a mentor to help me build a grazing plan and everything, so that should help.
So, Sean, I just wanted to, because I think this is important to stress. So, what'd you say was 200 cows
Yeah,
times 7 days times how many acres?
25.
Or times 7 days divided by 25 acres. So that's 56 grazing days per acre. If you value that, say, I know you're just a good neighbor and you were weren't charging your neighbor this year, but say
No.
you put that at a cost of $1.50 per cow per day, that's $84 an acre in increased value. So you take the net return from the one crop and you essentially double it just by adding livestock onto that land. And if you can come up with a deal with a producer who I'm sure on in your area in dry year, they're pretty stoked to be able to get that kind of grazing for that kind of money. And where are you going to find a fungicide or a new seed variety that's going to give you that type of profitability return? Never mind the investment in the most valuable resource, which is your land. You cycle those nutrients, you capture more sunlight.
Yeah. No, it's pretty exciting. Like this was, yeah, you put those grazing numbers to my operations economics and it looks very profitable. And then now I'm working with a producer right now trying to build the plan for 25 grazing and we're just kind of sorting through that all right now, which is kind of fun. And he's getting so excited. He's actually thinking about buying more cows just to do this with me. Because he sees the benefit of his reduced feed costs and if he can and also he's got some tired pasture as well. So he's trying to keep them off the pasture a little bit longer as well. If we can bring them home earlier and all that kind of stuff. So it's been really fun. I look forward to it.
Well, and to put that into context for those grain farmers that are, well, not necessarily on tonight, but that are watching in the future, I think it's $673 according to Manitoba Cost of Production to grow an acre of canola. So at 13.23, which was the last time I did the math, I know canola's more. It was a $51 break even. So to grow
Hmm.
60 bushels of canola, it's almost the equal amount of profitability as just grazing a cover crop later in the fall, not even the plant biomass that came off like from the summer. So it's like, I mean, yeah, when canola is $24 and there's very limited risk involved because you're getting such a high return on that crop. It probably isn't the most attractive thing to look at, but when margins are this tight, it's like doing a simple practice like that. I mean, yes, it's an outside the box thought, but it's like your profitability just doubled and your risk decreased.
Yeah, exactly. And in a dryland setting like we are, like this is in a way a double crop in 1 year. We're getting that hay cut, and then we're getting animals on the ground. For me, as the grain farmer, I kind of view that as two different crops, so to speak, and I'm earning revenue stream from both of those. So yeah, it was definitely cool to see we can do that in a dry year.
Yeah. So what's going on here, Sean?
Yeah, so now it's kind of transitioning to our fall forage. So we ended up seeding fall forage mix from Covers and Co. into some chickpea stubble. And it was again, I already mentioned we got some good moisture in the fall, so try to take advantage of that and hitting on some of those soil health principles like living root days and diversity and all that kind of stuff. So that middle picture is about a month after seeding, I believe. And same with the left picture, you can see some of the roots on that some of those winter cereals. And so as the soil health nerd in me, like all this just really fascinated me, being able to cover that chickpea stubble, which usually is very barren and prone to soil and wind erosion and whatnot in the wintertime. Now we actually are holding that ground down with some living roots, and I was just loved it. But now the plan for this crop is to actually graze it probably around early to mid-June, or cut it for green feed. Haven't 100% decided yet, but we've got some options. And then after that, we'd like to go back in with a warm season cover crop and seed that later, like in July or whatever, and hopefully get some moisture to get that established to then graze again in the fall on this field. So that's kind of the plan here.
Well, and I knew you were going to touch on this, Sean, so I kept it out of my portion of the presentation. So yeah, this is something that we utilize, and even in a dry year, we find that this is just an awesome system because if you can guarantee yourself a crop, unless we're getting, record drought, it's like that fall rise is going to capture the snowfall. It's going to capture anything as far as early moisture. It's just such an early start to the season to be able to, get your first crop. um, and then obviously context, so very important, going back in with a warm season in the middle of summer, something that's going to, drought tolerant and, just using water more efficiently. It's like on a dry year, it works good. And on an average or above average moisture situation, it's phenomenal. I'm a broken record. 96% of a plant is sunlight and water, and not just cattle production, but in all agriculture production. It's like we need to do a better job of utilizing those two resources way more efficiently. And this is, in my opinion, it's just a really, really easy way and high probability of success. And all you're doing is just capturing more sunlight.
Yeah, exactly. I know all the soil principles are equally important, but soil armor and living root days are two of the most important ones to me personally that I've been trying to improve on. And just kind of utilizing fall crops like this and then going in with warm season again, kind of getting that double cropping model into our system. Get 200 plus days a year that we're actually growing a plant. It's kind of fun.
Yeah. And if water's your biggest limiting constraint, it's like just put plants in place to capture it when it's
Yeah,
there.
exactly. I'm not too worried about it.
All right. Well, great job, Sean. Stick around for question time. Yeah, awesome job presenting that. Looking forward to getting you back at question time. So, Darwin, if you want to turn your video on and your mic on. So, those of you who are a regular viewer of the webinar, you'll recognize Darwin Gork. For those of you that are a first timer on the webinar, Darwin is a good friend of mine. As I said off the start, Darwin and I are pretty good friends, and I don't do much as far as serious investments on the farm without running it by him. So in the name of diversity and having unique perspectives on the panel, Darwin was wondering about talking about a greater system. So the theme is reducing feed costs in 2025. But Darwin asked if it was all right if he could touch on the entire system, and Darwin made comment about that starts right at calving time. So I was more than encouraging. I'm looking forward to it. Darwin, I guess for those of you that don't know you, introduce yourself, what your operation looks like, and let's dive into her.
Yeah, thanks, Joe. Uh, Darwin Gork, I'm part of family farm, Gork Family Farms. I farm with my brother and myself, and my son Connor has kind of joined the operation in the last 2 years here since he got home from university. So that's been really cool having him around. He kind of has been driving some of this newer innovation for us. So. Uh, like I was saying, Joe, earlier on, for me, reducing winter feed costs basically starts with your time of calving. I know lots of guys can't calve in May, June for various reasons, but if you can, it just just gives you such an advantage and not having to have a third trimester cow feeding her in January kind of thing. It just your savings are just so big because of that. Uh, so I actually I don't know why I'm feeling fairly old after listening to you guys talk, but uh, kind of my wife Lori and I, we bought our first land in '97, Joe, and we started corn grazing in '98. And that's kind of been our biggest thing for winter feed cost savings. But as we've come along here, I'm just going through my notes here. We've done corn grazing, we've swath grazed, we've silage pile grazed. We're a big thing for us now is grazing in these shoulder seasons in the spring and in the fall. Uh, since I've met you, we've the farm has basically gone to a as little input from the synthetic fertilizer end of things as we can, and I'm actually proud to say that in 24 we sowed our entire crop without any fertilizer in the spring, and you know we grew a nice average crop. Optimizing our profitability basically is what it did. Uh, everything that we sold was diversity. Uh, I guess the probably the least amount of diversity that we had was corn and forage soybeans. Every other field that we sowed probably had we grew a full season cover from you. We grow our own kind of cool season cover with about 5 or 6 species in it. Our grain land that we that we combined was barley, oats, forage peas, undersown with clover and annual ryegrass to utilize for fall grazing, and it's just kind of it's really cool once you start doing some of this stuff and really see the savings that you can that you can achieve. It's just it's kind of mind blowing actually.
So Darwin, I want to obviously I'm quite familiar with your guys' story, but I wonder if you wouldn't entertain me and let's start about your feeding system right from that calving standpoint. I got you touched a little bit on why you're calving in May, but maybe talk about I mean, you can talk about some economics if you want, but I just talk about your system from a winter feeding standpoint. Starting in May, obviously that includes winter pasture, but just walk us through kind of the season, and then I think it's a nice segue. We can get to some of your pictures.
Okay. We'll start April 1st, Joe. That works
Yeah.
better for me. And the reason for that is because that's essentially when we start feeding our cow herd. Uh, Up and usually we can reliably graze corn until you know getting towards the end of March. Some years not quite because it'll break up, and then if we've got corn left, we got to figure out what we're going to do with it. But so we start feeding those cows April 1st, and at that point we essentially feed them all they want to eat, combination of corn silage, round bales in feeders, and So they'll, they start calving May 1st, and generally we feed them all of April, all of May, and by then we've got 30 days of calving in, and they start going out to native pasture and grazing, and there'll still be the odd cow calving at that time, but we don't worry about it. We actually don't even all our mature cows, we don't we feed them, they calve themselves. We if something if we notice a problem, we'll deal with it, but it's surprising, very few things show up. So we're not running around tagging those calves or anything like that. It just saves that in itself is a huge saving. You just don't need the manpower to deal with those calves and farting around with them and that kind of thing.
So what time of year are you guys processing, Darwin?
We process everything usually the first 2 weeks in October. We'll start bringing. We like to have them in groups of about 150 to 200 cows pairs, Joe, and we will bring those groups through the yard. That's about the number of cows that if we start at 8 in the morning, we can separate the cows and the calves, uh, and three guys can vaccinate those calves and castrate all the bull calves, and you're done at 5 or 6 o'clock. That's kind of the system that we do.
So Darwin, I know the answer to this question. However, I've had not a change in heart, but I've just realized it doesn't really fit our system. And I honestly, it's going against the grain as far as where the kind of low cost producers are heading, which is keeping your calves on in the winter or picking a like a later weaning date, whether that's February or March. Basically, in our system, we did try that for a few years, but we just found it was much more economical with our marginal feed. That if we are feeding a dry cow in November, December, she can survive on a lot less if she doesn't have a calf at foot. Now, of course, that comes with problems weaning younger calves. But we just see it as a way to better utilize our marginal quality feed later in the fall and keep those cows in better condition. So maybe talk a little bit about your strategy as far as weaning time and where you guys are at.
So so generally we end up weaning December, January, Joe, and that's just a function of we get those BVD, IBR drugs into those calves in October. They go back out on the cow. Uh, Ground freezes, and then generally when we wean those calves, we just we start feeding them silage with the cow. We wean them, and they go into a dry lot for 6 weeks, 8 weeks, and then we sell them in March kind of thing, or end of February this year. Uh, it just That's kind of the system that we got that's worked for us. I think I've thrown around the idea of our we run our first and second calvers together in one group, and I really see some benefits. I'm often wondering about maybe we should wean those calves, May calves, we wean them in middle of September, October, out onto some of this that I think they would wean fantastically out onto some of this annual ryegrass regrowth, and just lock the cows up and let the calves go out and graze. They're used to grazing when everything's quieting down. Just take the cows wherever. And then those cows will if they're grazing some annual ryegrass themselves, they put on some tremendous weight, and it's just all about, like I say, reducing your winter feed costs, and you're not having to get those young cows back in condition if they're run down a bit.
So I think, well, maybe let's talk about some of your corn pictures here. I think once we get to the kind of more mature, when we'll get into some of the details as far as when you're kicking corn in and grazing days and what you're doing for inputs and whatnot. But obviously, we're looking at corn and forage soybean. I know you guys kind of got a little bit different from the spacing standpoint. Why don't you just talk a little bit about what's going on here?
Yeah, so we've got a split row planter, Joe, 15-inch rows. And what we do is we sow the corn on 45s with two 15s of soybeans down the middle. And that seems to be a really nice sweet spot. Uh, so that
What
corn,
what do
what
you
we
so-
do is
what are you sowing for population on the corn?
I was just gonna tell you here. If we so guys will be used to 30-inch corn. We set the planter for about 33,000 plants on a 30-inch row. Now what you get with that is you get 22,000 plants of corn per acre then, and we get roughly I had it figured out here, 41,000, just over 41,000 forage soybeans per acre. So from a cost standpoint, with what our corn costs us this year, it's $74 for the corn. It's about 17 bucks for the soybeans and the inoculant, and whatever, 5, 6 bucks for a pass of Roundup. We generally only sow it once. So you can basically sow that crop for 100 bucks an acre. Uh, Again, there's no synthetic fertilizer going down with that. Uh, we've been grazing corn for 20 some years, oftentimes on the same land. Uh, try to grow cover crops every third year, or whatever. We seem to have a tremendous uh, jump in yield in our corn, and if the year after we have a cover crop in, Joe, it's really cool to see, especially if we graze the cover crop. It really seems to bump it up then. Uh, but yeah, no, this is a really nice sweet spot. Here's yeah, this is one of the forage soybeans with that's kind of the nodulation that we're getting on it. And I had a guy tell me one time, yeah, well, you get the nodules, but they're not fixing anything anyways, but they are all pink. So they're fixing nitrogen. Uh,
Oh, also we have some pretty good data that says otherwise too.
yeah. Yeah.
Well,
And
and seriously, like we did some well, a whole bunch of different trials. Actually, my good buddy Darcy Stewart, he's on the call tonight. I don't think we did 45-inch, but I think that is about the sweet spot as far as maximizing or sorry, minimizing corn yield loss while maximizing the actual soybean growth. And our 60-inch trials at 16,000 plants, like in 2022, we saw 100 residual pounds of nitrogen after growing the corn crop. So it's like they're fixating. That's a big ass vegetative plant, and it's capturing sunlight all summer long.
yeah. Go ahead, just go to the next picture, Joe.
Yep, you betcha.
Yeah, so that's what we're getting. That's what we're kind of getting for growth on the soybeans, and that's not a great crop. That was I think that's from 23, and it was fairly dry, but yeah, that's kind of what we grow for corn, and that's our soybeans. And we there has been times in 23 we swathed some of it because the corn was only about 7 feet high, so we were able to swath it. And the idea there was I just wanted to capture some of that green soybean growth in the swath, and it seemed to work pretty good. We I don't know what we did, a quarter or something of that corn and soybeans, but if you graze it later in the year, you just go to the next slide. It that's what you got. And I'm not too worried about that. Like you can see some of the soybean stalks there between the corn. Uh,
Yep.
To me, it doesn't matter. We still graze the corn. We had that diversity throughout the summer. The soybean was a green growing plant. You know, it'll grow well after the corn gets frosted out. Like uh, I think that other picture that was like somewhere around Halloween, and it's the soybeans are still actively growing, Joe. So. The reason actually I put this picture in here though was just to there's two varieties of corn there side by side.
Yep.
And we've grown a lot of varieties of corn over the years and have been told and recommended by certain seed companies and salesmen and all kinds of things and the reality is you find something that works, you just kind of stick with it. Like you can see the corn on the right there is probably, I don't know, 20% more yield, 25% more yield on it than the stuff on the left. And that picture was just taken this week. That's kind of what we're dealing with usually, you know, when you get into February, March kind of thing. The corn does break down. Uh,
So Darwin, what is what's the difference between those two varieties? But the second thing is, so you're not utilizing any fertilizer, and I would say that like for grazing, most producers, because they want, I'm just going to scroll back one, most producers they look at this picture and they're like, oh, I want to we got to capture that bean biomass too, and I don't disagree with them. And I say, well, this picture here is generally what it looks like. So what are you doing for grazing days, even when they're not completely utilizing those soybeans as well? And on 45-inch spacing, right?
yeah. The 45-inch spacing doesn't affect the yield of the corn at all, Joe. Uh, so I'm not for that $100 an acre, and then you know put in whatever you want for your land and planting and spraying it or whatever. But uh, our rule of thumb is 175 to 200 days is what we want, and that'll be for a mature dry cow. Now we do graze a lot of this corn with the calves on the cows, you know, in November, December. So obviously you're not gonna get, you know, the calves surprisingly eat a lot. I would say 2.5 calves to equals one cow by and large when you're grazing the corn. It really adds up.
Yep.
Uh, so. You know, from that standpoint, like I figure our land worth about $60 an acre, 25 for planting, you know, 8 for spraying. And, you know, you can add a few other things if you want. Basically, $200 an acre is all cost in, and that's us. That's using custom rates for us for sowing it and stuff. So you get talking 175 to 200 cow days an acre. And really our corn costs us about the same as what it costs us to pasture our cows in the summer. So from June 1st till April 1st, it's essentially a summer grazing cost for our cows.
Yep. So
That's when you really start to add up some savings.
Well, I think the Manitoba cost of production budget was they averaged 230 days winter feed cost at $4.37. So you can take 230 minus $3 a day, and that is substantial amount of cost savings.
Yeah, yeah.
So I guess Darwin, what are you guys silaging that as well, or everything goes for grazing? And I think probably for people that are, I guess, new to the concept or thinking about something like this, what are you doing for fencing? How often are you moving them? How are they cleaning it up?
Uh, no, we silaged some too, Joe. And this year we actually silaged some of the stuff that we grew on 45-inch rows with our old like 3 PN header. It pulled it all in and worked fine enough. You wouldn't want to. It's not the most efficient thing. Like you're backing up sometimes and that, but we made it work. So we'll silage, whatever, a quarter, a couple hundred acres. We quite often use the silaging for a buffer. So we'll sow about 800 acres of corn. And if the corn is really good, we silage more of it. We put it in a pile because that we got control over that. You can cover it, you can use it another year. And basically kind of have it so that more or less we're always got our grazing corn that's standing used up by, the middle of March to the end of March. It's kind of, and it's not an exact science, but you can get pretty close with it.
Yeah. So what's going on here?
So this is just what we're doing is actually sowing corn into clover there. First week in June. But I just put that in there. It's part of this shoulder season grazing or shoulder season growth that you can have on your land. So that clover is growing from the get-go, right? As soon as the leaves start to or come out on the trees, that basically that clover's starting and it's growing. So it's pumping carbon into your land. Uh, the plan with that stuff uh, in the future, we've kind of we want to utilize a 3 crops in 2 years approach on probably a third of our acres. So like I say, we've kind of got our own uh, cool season mix of plants where we'll sow barley, oats, peas. We throw a few turnips in there, and then make sure we have quite a bit of clover and annual ryegrass in there. And then if you flip to the next picture, Joe. So this picture is in November, and that's kind of some of that regrowth from that cool season blend that we sow. But what we do with this stuff is as soon as we harvest that, silage it off, we sowed we went in with the drill and sowed fall triticale and fall rye mixed together right into the stubble. And it is in there with the turnips and the annual ryegrass that grew back. So the plan going forward then is either we have the option of grazing that stuff like in the following spring, or we can just, if it's a nice crop, we can let it go, uh, silage that stuff off, mid to third week in June, and then I'm hoping to probably sow actually sorghum into it, and
Yeah, after grazing in the spring.
y- or silaging even,
Silage.
yeah.
Yeah. Yep.
And just see what we're gonna end up with. So a problem is we're gonna have so much stuff to graze. Uh, really don't want any more cows. We got enough of them now, so I don't. We'll just see what happens. If it's a decent enough crop, we can. I wouldn't be opposed to just grazing it and tromping most of it into the ground. And just taking the cream of the crop off of it, and then the next year we'd probably go back in and sow corn and soybeans again.
Well, that's a good problem to have if you don't know what to do with all the feed you're growing,
Yeah.
Darwin. I
Yeah,
got I got one question about this.
yeah.
So are you green seeding and then spraying, or are you spraying and then seeding? And do you kick the cows out to clean up that residue, or do you just leave it to decompose for that corn crop?
Well, maybe all of the above, Joe. I will see where it goes. In this particular case here, we just seeded it, and then I think about 5 days later, I sprayed it with heat and Roundup. And it did a pretty nice job, and I did go back and spray that field again, though there was the odd clover plant that that didn't get killed the first time. But yeah, no, it worked pretty nice. And interestingly enough, we were so wet here this year, Joe, uh, and couldn't get out onto any of our fields. And that particular field where that clover was, that isn't the driest field in the world. Uh, we couldn't go anywhere else, but we went out and checked on that clover field and pulled the planter in there, and we could plant that field.
So I guess one last question, then I do want to talk about your cow herd. You've got some bulls that I'm interested in, but
Yeah.
that trit, clover, annual ryegrass in the fall, were you grazing that in the fall, or are you worried about that winter killing?
No, we did graze it. Yeah.
Grazed it
And
and it came back like that. Like that's a pretty ideal result.
no, okay, so this Joe is that's not really coming back. So that's basically it's stubble when we sowed the rye and tread into it.
Yep.
And then so this would have been like I can't remember when we silaged it. Too late because it went down on us and it was a bugger to deal with. But uh so that's mostly ryegrass for the most part that you see there. Now you have to pull that ryegrass apart, and then you could see the rows of the trit and fall rye in there. So we didn't graze that like right down to the dirt. We basically just kind of let them eat it down to stubble height and then took them off. So they probably actually didn't really even graze a whole bunch of the fall rye and the fall trit that was in there. They just basically utilized
ARG.
yeah. And we had that mixture on like a third of our acres. It's just amazing what those cattle will do on that fall rye regrowth. It's the most powerful grass out there, I think.
And you wonder there wouldn't be a blade of grass or any blade of vegetation out there, and the cows are out there picking away at what you would think would be summer fallow. Not that bad, but you know where
Yeah,
I'm at with
yeah,
it.
yeah.
So maybe
I-
Darwin, probably a good opportunity to talk about having the right cow for your type of system. And I mean, we've just seen it. Our cow that we've had cow herd, we've had significant amount of turnover over the past 5 to 10 years. But really, what it has developed for us is a cow that will not just survive but thrive in a system that's like this, where they're out grazing. And I know, I mean, your cow herd is one that I try and design ours around as well. But maybe talk a little bit about just your cattle herd system as a whole, and why having the right cow is important for this.
Well, the the right cow, Joe, is the one that sticks around and stays in that system. And everyone has their own idea on what that is going to be. And for the most part, I have my ideas too, and we breed for a certain type, uh, but so when we graze that corn, when we're trying to get that 175, 200 days on it, Joe, uh, we use that. You asked the question about moving the electric wire, and we move it. We try to move it every 3 days. Sometimes we even go actually down to 2 days. If we got 500 cows in a group or something, because it's so efficient to feed them, right? Whether you got 5 cows or 500, it takes the exact same amount of time because you're just moving a wire. So those every year we'll have the odd cow that can't handle that, and we'll just pull them out and put them in the yard. And those cows that cannot handle that corn grazing on our land, because we don't give them all the corn that they want to eat. If we put those cows in the yard on hay, they balloon right up and gain a lot of weight just on hay in the yard. So like I challenge people that say like corn is full of energy and it's, oh, your cows are gonna get fat and you're gonna blow the feed out on them. We've been doing it for 26 years now. We haven't had those issues. We actually run them fairly lean on it, make sure we do get to that 200 days so that we're you know feeding them as cheaply as we can. And once it warms up in April, that's when we let them eat all they want to eat. So our cows, like that would be a typical condition. That cow right there, she's an 8, so that's a 6-year-old cow. That's a typical condition of what our cows would look like in November. Uh, in January, they're going to be a little leaner looking than that. But by May, when she calves, she's gonna be carrying probably another body condition score than that. So they do bounce up and down a little bit, and that's the beauty of that, being able to do that with that system. You can do that. We've got cows that I call them my purebred breeders cows. We got them up in the yard now because they won't respect the wire, like Mac was saying. So we just, you know, every year we kind of seem to forget about them, and then they're out of our nucleus cow herd that we select our own bulls from. And so those cows will kind of be on that basically all you can eat corn system because they walk through the wire. They just put their head down and walk under the wire, and they're in the next paddock. Those cows are 300 pounds heavier than the average size of our cow herd.
Yeah.
They just it's all you can eat resources, and that's what happens to them. So
So
I'm much more interested in just developing a herd of cows that fit into this system and thrive in it. We've gone to raising all of our own bulls for the most part, Joe. Well, you know, we got a mature bull battery of about 30 bulls, and we only buy usually one new bull about every 2 to 3 years. And they don't all turn out, those bulls, but if they do, uh, we use them heavily on our nucleus cow herd, which is what we use to produce all of our own bulls, and those bulls get thrown out to our commercial cows. Interesting. One thing that I'm really throwing around, it's all about reducing costs, reducing winter feed costs, but just reducing costs in general is we've got about 30 yearling bulls or coming yearling bulls in the pen this year, and we castrated, got them down to about 30, and now it's like, well, I can hardly tell the difference between any of the 30 that are left. And I'm really considering, with maybe about half of our cows this year, just turning those bulls out with about a 15 cows to every yearling ratio, and then taking those yearlings and developing them and then selling them as 2-year-olds. So
well, and something that we found important is when you're selecting bulls, you got to select bulls from a system that you want to mimic. So I was serious when I said I'm interested for sure, because it's just, I mean, we bought yearling bulls from conventional systems that they don't turn 5 years old on this place. They're usually gone well before that. And we bought
yeah,
bulls from systems, very 2 year olds from systems very similar to ours, and just absolutely amazing. You get those bulls in the same winter feed system. The difference from a condition standpoint.
yeah,
I watched Bert Teicher this winter, and he just made such a good point about keeping the bulls with the cow herd. Like if you preg check, all those cows should be bred. And why is it that a cow is asked to raise a calf and stay in good condition, and a bull gets separated with better feed. And we got to baby these damn things. If they can't stay in good shape and all they got to do is breed for a couple months of the year, are you that interested in them even being bulls? Affecting your
Yeah,
genetics?
no, exactly, Joe. Yeah. And I know, like I said, I was gonna do a shameless plug, and I'll do it now. Like we do develop 2-year-old bulls, black and reds, and black red carriers. A lot of them are too. We're selling them this year for $5,000, and guys will say, "Well, how can you sell a bull like that for 5,000?" And for us, it's simply based on what that bull was worth if he was a steer in the fall, plus the feed cost, plus a little bit of gravy for us. And
For sure.
that's I don't understand why bulls are valued the way they are. Like, just simple math, when you were doing your little thing here, $4,500 cow was $1,100, and you said $1,000 to feed her. So
My system.
yeah, if like, there's gonna be lots of $9,000 bulls sold this spring, Joe.
Yep.
And so that bull is gonna cost you $2,200 for the year, plus the $1,000 to feed is $3,200. That bull's gonna cost you, and you're probably gonna get 30 calves out of that bull a year if you're lucky. So that's over $100 a yeah. Just in those things, you haven't got the bull. Like, it's just crazy what how those expenses can increase on those on your calves. Like,
Well, and Darwin, that's spread out over 5 years. We've bought lots of yearling bulls that they just not. It's the exception, not the norm, that they stick around longer than 5 years. That
yeah,
cost
yeah,
actually goes
yeah,
up if he gets pink eye or foot rot, and you ship him at 3 years old.
yeah. My biggest problem, Joe, is that we don't sell them for enough money. Guys think that
Yes.
they're some kind of inferior product. I just refuse to gouge guys for them. That it's just crazy, because you can take your old bull to market now at 2,000 pounds. He's worth 220, is $4,400, and put another 500 in, and away you go.
Yeah.
So instead of
Well,
9,000, you got $500 invested.
I would argue the gravy you talk about, the little bit of gravy at the end, it's like well, that's the most valuable part, because you're buying the system. You're buying into a system or you're buying in genetics that's got a 20-year system behind it. You're not buying into that bull stood at the creep feeder all winter and looks fantastic,
Yeah, yeah, yeah. No, no, exactly. So,
Okay,
no,
well,
it's
Darwin,
it's
I'm going to stop you there because, as I expected, we are wildly over time and we got some questions to get to here. So, guys, if you want to, let me see if I can figure out how to do this here. Beauty. Um, if you guys want to turn your mics and video on, I think the first question I'm going to throw at you guys, just while I'm kind of organizing these questions. Maybe Mac, we'll start with you because you've been patiently sitting there for a while. So the question I'm going to ask is two, I guess. One, what about what you're doing really excites you for the future? And the second thing is, what is a practice you've heard maybe in the last little while, or you've learned about that you're excited to implement over the say the next 5 years? So just to to reiterate, Mac, what are you excited about with your existing practice, and what's a new practice that you're excited to implement?
Sure. Probably we're always excited about finding ways to reduce winter feed costs for us. Like, that's how we got down the corn path, and looking at bale grazing and swath grazing and different things that we've tried. And I think there's even more potential there to keep improving that, even with what some of the other guys are working on. We've never tried intercropping with corn. I know that's one of the questions there. That's never been something, but I've always been intrigued by it. I've watched it and watched different guys in the States doing stuff and thought it was really interesting. But so I think there's tons of potential, and we're really excited about trying more cover cover mixes and cover crops to just improve what we can feed per acre throughout the year, and exploring different options and what that can look like for us. So we think there's lots of potential in that.
Cool. Sean, I know you got a bit of a different perspective than the other guys, but what excites you about kind of what you did this year? And then I guess what's the vision look like for your farm for the future?
Yeah, kind of already mentioned a little bit in my talk, but what's really excited me so far is the ability to kind of use relay cropping, and companion cropping and alternate seeding dates and et cetera to get kind of two crops in 1 year, even in our dryland area. That's been really fun to try and do. Now I need to get my equipment better aligned with being able to do that, like disc drills, et cetera, and all that kind of fun stuff. So picking away at that, but that'll come in time. And then moving forward, one thing that really fascinates me is adding perennials into my rotation, perennial forages, but also perennial grains. I know they're coming down the pipeline here pretty quickly, potentially. So that really excites me, and integrating that into a rotation, so to speak, and also integrating livestock with that, and just kind of getting that whole system approach with perennials is something that I'm excited about.
Sean, and I guess in your research, maybe just, I mean, it's a new concept to a lot of people, what you're talking about as far as specific species, and is there an opportunity for animal integration in that type of management practice?
With the perennials you're talking, Joe?
You betcha.
Yeah, so I got my hands on some Kernza seed, which is a patented trademark cultivar from Kansas, from the Land Institute, and it is kind of marketed as both a feed option as well as like a wheat for grain. And so yeah, I'm really excited to going to sow that this spring. It's not going to fertilize, so it'll just stay vegetative. Probably won't touch it all year, just let it establish in year one, and then next year look at actually getting a grain harvest off that. And they say around year 3 is kind of where it's supposed to peak for its yield, and then after that you can maybe graze it for another couple years if you want to stretch it out, or if you do incorporate some grazing into the first 3 years, then it might kind of shorten its lifespan a little bit of how long you want to keep it in stand. But yeah, that's lots of that research is coming out of Kansas, so I'm excited to see what it looks like in Saskatchewan.
So what is harvest date on Kernza, like perennial Kernza once it's established?
Like mid to late August, I believe. So it'd
And
be earlier compared to my other crops.
yeah, and what's it like as far as moisture efficiency, drought tolerance, Sean?
Well, that's I know there's cultivars being bred right now in Manitoba, I believe. So hopefully that is better suited for our geography. I don't know what to expect for these varieties coming out of Kansas, but in terms of drought resilience, that's definitely kind of the number one reason why I'm excited for it, is its ability to handle drought, because it is basically an intermediate wheatgrass that it's been bred with wheat. So obviously the extensive root system that we get from that will help kind of buffer some of those drought cycles we go through, I hope. So that's a big reason why I'd like to get into perennials, is setting up the system so when we do hit these dry spells that we've been in, we're a little bit more ready for that, because our monocrop annual crops obviously don't enjoy that.
For sure. Darwin, throw it to you. What's something you're doing right now you're excited about, going to keep doing, and what's a new practice that you've heard of that you're looking forward to try?
Oh, I think the most exciting thing for us, Joe, is just this 3 crops in 2 years. With that to me, I think that's got a lot of potential. Uh, yeah. What was the second part of the question? Something.
What's a new idea you've heard of in the last year or two, or maybe that Connor's been researching that you're looking forward to try either next year or into the future?
Oh, I think that part of it, I think the thing that I'm most interested in trying is just, it's not from the cropping standpoint, it's from that bull standpoint, where if we could eliminate like 3/4 of our mature bulls and replace them with our homegrown yearlings, and then develop them and sell them as 2-year-olds. I think that would be just a huge headache and not having to deal with those mature bulls, and then just the cost saving all around. Like feeding 20 bulls, you can feed 30 cows for the same amount of feed. So you can just, you know, today's calf prices, that's another 50,000 or 75,000 bucks, whatever you want, just by eliminating those bulls. So just huge opportunity there.
And that Burke Tiker changed my life in the wintertime, because I used to tell people, I'm like, we spend the same amount of time in the wintertime keeping water in front of the bulls and keeping the bulls fed because they're in a corral or they're around home or they're getting out or something, as we do for the cow herd of 300 or 400 cows. Opening the gate and letting the bulls just out with the cows, I can see the ones I want to call. Because if the cows are in great shape and you can't winter like a cow, you don't have a place on this farm. So, yeah, it's just from a straight quality of life standpoint, it's been a game changer for us. Mac, I got a couple specifics, questions coming in from the chat for you. I got two, so if you can remember these. With less mature cobs, is there less risk of acidosis in your corn? And I guess from a test standpoint, I don't know if you'll know the answer of this, but what's the TDN and protein levels of your corn at that stage?
Sure. Acidosis, yeah, we've never had trouble. I think the maturity is an element, but I think the more important part is that regular move. And it's that balance in nutrition of a 3-day move that they have that peak with the cobs, and then it drops with the stripping of the leaves, and then cleaning up the stalks, and then you do it again, and just continuing that path every 3 days. I think that's really key with acidosis. So we've had some neighbors that have just kind of turned them out into a full quarter of corn and then been unhappy with the results. And I really think that's the biggest difference, is that nutrition playing with those cows experience. Because if you do that and they're out there for, say, a month, depending on how many cows you have, yeah, that first week they have all kinds of nutrition and it's running right through them. But by the last 10 days, it's not great. And I think that's, and the risk of acidosis in that first period, I think, could be much higher. So, but having said that, we haven't had the problem. So that's how I answer that. And to answer the question on feed tests, TDN, we typically kind of right around 60 to 65, maybe a low of 55 would be typical for our corn. And proteins probably in that 7 to 10 range on the highest that we've seen on those crops for that type of maturity that we've had.
So in really, really cold weather, Mac, are you doing anything else as far as supplementation for those cows, as far as energy?
Not a ton. Sometimes we will. It depends on conditions. Like if it's a real bad storm, we definitely are set up to be able to roll out a bale or two, or if we got a big blizzard coming in or something, we might feed them up closer to the water for a bit and just take the pressure off and not fight if we're going to be fighting weather real bad. But aside from that, not a ton. We'd have silage bales around and a little bit of that at times, but generally we'd function on corn. Our target was about 90 days to get through with, and we'd pretty minimal supplementation around the corn for our cow herd. And we are calving May, June as well. So that is a factor for sure to consider.
Definitely.
When you're calving. Yeah.
So, Shawn, I got kind of an interesting one for you. It's not as much a question as it was a conversation I was having with a producer in Southwest Saskatchewan. I know you're a very well-researched guy. I'm sure you have an opinion on the subject, but talking stripper headers, for catching snowfall. But something interesting the producer said to me was he's actually having better luck establishing biannuals in his cash crops with the stripper head because it's capturing the snow load. And what he's excited for is kind of what Darwin's talking about, where it's cash crop. We can overwinter a biannual, use it for a cattle feed, and then take another crop, kind of a different play on the 3 crops in 2 years. Just wondering, I know people are just generally interested in stripper heads. I would be surprised if you knew nothing about it. Sorry to throw this one on you, but it just kind of came to mind. Just wondering if that's something that you've looked into in your operation, and if you've heard of any ideas kind of like the one I was just chatting about.
Yeah, great question. definitely want a stripper header. Like I mentioned a couple minutes ago, there's some equipment I need to add to my operation to align better with my goals, and that's number one on the list. When you buy that, you also have to have a disc drill, so they go together. So yeah, a bit of research I have done with stripper head stubble, and this isn't research, it's actually a conversation I also had with a producer in, I think Idaho it was, interesting enough. He was doing tests where he would have like draper stubble cut at whatever foot tall versus strip stubble, and he was doing a lot of this throughout the years. And what he found was the stripper stubble collects more snow potentially, but it's actually more of the distribution of it. Whereas like a shorter stubble, there's areas where it's barren, but then there's areas where there's huge banks and kind of everything in between. So as a whole, I think it still catches a decent amount of snow, but it's not even. So with the stripper stubble, it's nice and evenly distributed throughout the field. And then one thing that we were talking about, which was interesting, and I mean, no research to back this up, this was just a conversation, but he almost thought, and I kind of agree with it, that it does a better job actually insulating the soil and keeping it warmer, which then actually keeps your biology alive longer and more active, and they may wake up quicker in the spring. And that's what's driving yields more than the actual moisture it's catching, which I thought was really interesting.
Well, that's both interesting and I mean, corn grazing, which we've covered tonight, it's kind of a similar idea where it's like the corn never gets hard, or the snow never gets hard in the corn. It always stays kind of like a fluffy. You can see
Yeah.
why the insulation would actually be better. And I guess Houston was the name of the producer that I was
Hmm.
chatting with. It would also make it a better environment for plants to be overwintering too, keeping a green living root in the ground. Um, other than other on years that aren't 21 through 23, I've thought of it as on this farm. But the water management is, I mean, two different scenarios between your farm and ours. There's quite often years where uh, that would make tough situations. And one advantage you have over me with the disc drill is disc drills are not a lot of fun to deal with on a wet year.
Yeah, I can imagine.
Darwin, I got a two-parter for you. One's from the chat, and well, actually, they're both from the chat. We got a producer that's wondering about corn intercropping. If they obviously it's something you've tried. Wondering if you've done anything from an intercropping standpoint outside of the beans, and just what you've seen as far as success between uh, the different practices or the different intercrops you've tried. And then we always get a ton of questions about swath grazing on webinars like this. So if you got anything to add as far as what you guys have done for swath grazing.
Yeah, sure. So, yeah, we have tried other things in the corn, Joe. Uh, 15 years ago, I played around a little bit with clover. I was just looking for things to do. Didn't really have a whole lot of success with it. We never really did anything on a full field scale because I didn't really have the equipment in order to get it out. So it was just kind of like throw it out on the back of the quad and see if we could get this stuff to grow, just broadcasting it on the soil. And never really had great success with that. Uh, the other thing that we've tried uh, recently has been hairy vetch. Uh, and the reason why I actually like the soybeans better than the hairy vetch is they seem to be a lot more reliable, especially if it's dry. Now, having said that, we've had tremendous success with hairy vetch if you had a wet year. Uh, and the hairy vetch does stay green and vegetative right throughout the winter and crawls up the corn, and the cows utilize it better. Uh, Connor and I have been throwing around the idea that we should sow corn and soybeans and then just broadcast a couple of pounds of vetch out there, kind of in hopes that you get a wet year that maybe it'll catch. And I think it would be. I think it's just it's adding a cool season legume to the mix, so it's just more diversity, and I think it would actually really be beneficial if you get the right weather. Vetch seems to be very dependent on that moisture.
I tell producers, I'm like, if you're putting vetch into corn, go with 2 pounds. Because if it's dry, it doesn't matter if you have 15 pounds out there, virtually nothing's going to come anyway. And if you have 2 pounds, you will be absolutely astonished if you get the rain, what 2 pounds of vetch can do in corn. It's unbelievable.
Yeah. Another thing, is actually probably I got thinking just with this question that come up, kind of segues from the last one. I'd actually like to try, uh, because I don't think that we're going to need the soybeans and the corn all the time for the nitrogen moving forward. It has given us we've eliminated the fertilizer. It has kind of been a nice, you can see that they're actually working because they're nodulating and they're pink inside. But I'd like to, I'm thinking about going to 45 or 60-inch corn and when the corn is 2 or 3 leaves, spraying it, and then as soon as it's sprayed out, actually sowing a mix of seeds in there, like whatever, maybe oats, ryegrass, clover, just to try that. I actually think that that would be kind of a really cool thing to try.
For sure. So
Now,
I,
and swath grazing, yes,
but
we actually do.
I gotta tell you, I'm like, we do have to touch on swath grazing. I just looked at my phone. We've been here almost 2 hours, and I promised that we try and shorten these. But yeah, touch on your experience with swath grazing, and then I got to give out the prizes, and I got a final question for you guys.
Okay. Yeah. So we do swath graze, Joe. Uh, for whatever reason, it seems to work best for us in say November, December. And in my experience with it is when we get into January and February, uh, just from the wind, I think the snow just turns into a hard mat, and our cows just don't never really ever did seem to thrive on that system. They do great on it when there isn't a whole lot of snow or it's just fluffy and it's not real cold, but that hard wind compacted snow, they have trouble. We have trouble with it.
Yeah, and that's our experience too. And if you go back and watch our webinar on the swath grazing, for those of you that asked about swath grazing, we didn't touch on enough. We did a webinar, I don't know if it was last year or 2 years ago, but really it was an awesome night and there was a lot of good information there. And I think the biggest reason I keep screwing up with is I keep cutting it with my disc spline and my swaths aren't getting big enough. But that seemed to be the general theme is the bigger you can get those swaths, the less risk, the better condition the cows are in because they know where it is. And as long as it's a big reward at the end, they'll dig for it. So I just a couple housekeeping things before I get into the last question. Greg Peronich, you're going to get the jacket, so put your address in and we'll mail one for you. And then Larry, because I didn't get to your question, we're going to give you the hat. So Larry, I'm sure you're in our system, but maybe pop your mailing address in there and we'll send you a Covers and Go hat. Also, if you want to reach out to us, we can send you Darwin's number. You can get more information on the bulls. But the last question, and I think we'll start with you, Shawn. You're the youngest panelist, and you are actively working with producers, and I do something similar in my line of work. And generally, not that we've got lots of producers in their 60s and 70s, but it's exciting that the young producers are seem to be the most keen and most adept to change. So the last question is, if you were giving advice to a young producer who's just getting going, what advice would that be? And I mean, you've got probably some real world examples of producers that you're working with. Just what are you telling them? They want to get interested in soil health. There may be mixed grain and cattle or even a grain farm like yourself. How to reduce winter feed costs or just best advice, Shawn.
Oh, that's a big question.
I know, it was intended to be. Take as much time as you need.
I think again, for me it'd be you either got to be all the way in or all the way out. You can't kind of half in, half out in this if you're making that transition from maybe more conventional type system to thinking outside the box a little bit. And it's all about kind of shifting your mindset and before you change your management practices. So if you're trying to change some of the management practices because it's the cool thing to do, or some neighbors are doing it, but you yourself haven't 100% bought into why you're doing it, I think you're going to set yourself up for failure. So you got to shift the way you think first before you start making these changes. And once you kind of get to that point where you feel comfortable with what you want to attain or obtain, then you can kind of go after it, and you can kind of shut all the noise off beside you. People are gonna make fun of you. People are gonna question why you're doing things. You just got to shut that noise off and be committed to what you want to do, and farm for your own operation and not farm for someone else. So I think that would be my biggest advice.
You know, I had a conversation, Sean, this week when I was out west. Excuse me. Unless the university system has changed a whole lot, I'm assuming you were taught similar things to I, and I remember my marketing professor always said, you know, don't chase the market, don't chase the market, stick with what works for your operation. And so if you're good at growing canola, keep growing canola. You know, I just couldn't fundamentally disagree with that more. I think with the cost of farming nowadays, and the risk that is involved, you're absolutely crazy that if you can't pencil out a profit with the amount of money that's being invested these days, if you can't be nimble enough to pivot based on your conditions, or I just think it's just so crazy going into a year penciling out a loss and just hoping for the best that things will change. And it doesn't necessarily mean, you know, change the variety number or whatever. You know, it might be more drastic change, but it's like name of the game is profitability. And so many times it's, you know, the opportunities that we've realized on our farm come from being nimble and not having pre-buying seed in November and hoping for the best that was going to bounce back, you know.
Exactly.
Cool. Well, thanks a lot, Sean, man. Enjoyed your input tonight. Mac, you're up next. So, I mean, you've got the next generation sitting behind you. What's the best, what's
Yes.
the best, what's the best advice you'd give to somebody just starting out? Maybe on the topic of reducing input costs, not just in 2025, but going forward.
Yeah, I think the biggest thing would be don't be afraid to try something. We've had people come to us and say, "Boy, we tried growing corn in our part of the world in the '90s or early 2000s," and they said it just didn't work. There was no way it'll work for you. The varieties have changed. I would have said, yeah, probably back then it probably didn't work. The varieties weren't there that you could make it work in our climate, but it has changed. And so don't be afraid to try it. Don't be afraid to think outside the box. Like really interesting just this fall with Emma being at Lakeland College. She's called home a couple times and said, you know, I feel like we're doing a lot of things right on the farm. And I thought that was really interesting. So maybe there is some change happening because she's brought up a few items that according to college, we're doing some stuff right. And we're somewhat progressive in our area. Lots of the neighbors talk about us and why it can't work, which I think is probably a common theme. And that is actually a good thing. Some people are discouraged by that. And it's easy to be discouraged by that. But
We only have people on this webinar who their neighbors talk shit about them.
there you go.
Exclusively the outcasts we have.
That's right. We're in that crowd, right? So it's a safe place. Yeah. But yeah, don't be afraid to try things and don't be afraid to put yourself outside your comfort zone and explore and try something new. Some of these courses that are out there, they really are worth the time, and they do change the way you think about things and challenge you to really think about why you do them. And I think that's a really important question to always be asking. So yeah.
Well, and the technical colleges, I got to give so much credit for. They really are, you know, the purpose of a university, in my opinion, in society is to push the norms of our understanding and test the things that you know are outside of comfort zones. And too often, my alma mater, not to pick on them specifically, I know a lot of universities are the same, but it's to ingrain the status quo. You know, it's just retest the same shit we've been doing for 50 years that's got us in a situation that farming's not that profitable. The next generation doesn't want to come back, and the people that are in it, it's just all it is bigger farms swallowing up smaller farms. So it's those technical colleges I give a lot of credit to because it's actually hands-on, interesting, diverse, outside the box thinking. So yeah, you're lucky that those, and it's with she's introduced to students that they're bringing ideas from their own farm too. So it's exciting. You've got somebody interested in working with for the future and bringing new ideas to the table. Darwin, you get last word. What are you excited about, and what's the best advice you would give for somebody that's just starting out? You've got another generation coming as well. Not exactly the advice you would necessarily give to Connor, but somebody who, you know, just heading down the farming path.
I I think the biggest thing, Joe, is just just re really be conscious of the peer group that you've got around you. I think that's probably that would probably be the biggest thing. Like it's so easy to no one wants to stick out, right? So if you want to go down this path, just hang around with crazy guys like us, and then you'll fit in. I actually had the I had the pleasure of going and listening to Ray Archuleta speaking Brandon here this week. I've always kind of wanted to listen to that guy talk. He just seems to be enthusiastic to me, and one of the things that Ray said was uh, he was big on intention. He said the intent of what you're doing, and I think that's probably the intention and just the confidence to do it. Then, you I don't know. I kind of smiled, Joe, because I'm looking at your picture here, and I remember like like you say, all these conversations that we have, and for as knowledgeable and that as you are, you're texting me about maybe potentially buying those cows and this and that, and finally, I just told you, Joe, if it makes sense, just have the balls to just do it. Just do it. Like I.
Well, and thank God you did, because it turned out to be about the best decision this farm's ever made. But Darwin,
Yeah.
I think you touch on a good point too, which is something that doesn't get talked often enough in this movement. We all like to joke and say, "Yeah, the neighbors talk about us," but it is hard having the neighbors talk about you if you don't have a community around you. It's really easy to feel lonely and abandoned ship unless you've got a network of people that you can bounce ideas off of, but also normalize the way you feel. My favorite part about my internal group, or my group that I started down the path with, I could drive by a intercrop that I screwed up, and I'd say, geez, you guys, I really screwed up here. And nobody was laughing. Everyone got in line and wanted to tell me all the screw ups they had on the farm. It's unlike anything I had experienced in the university world, the conventional world. But yeah, having a peer group that supports you, that's trying the same stuff, it's a lot of the holdup with adaptation and understanding is it's the social fear of being an outcast. And for somebody young, that is terrifying. As we age, we care less and less about that stuff. But, as a young person, we're insecure, we're unsure of our place in this world and who we are as people. It's like surrounding yourself with people that are willing to try new things. They'll be the biggest asset you'll ever have. So, anyone got any final thoughts? I think that's probably a good place to end it. We've gone over time, about 45 minutes, but I imagine with you guys that was kind of the plan. We're probably right on time. So, for everyone that's stuck with us, thanks a lot for being on. To the panelists, thanks you guys. That was as good as I had imagined. Thanks for the thoughts. Have a great night. Stay warm. We got a couple days, and we're back to plus temperatures, and hopefully spring.